Hi, this is Dylan, and I did my short story activity on the summer of the beautiful white horse. And a long little summary is it's about a 9-year-old boy, Armenian boy named Aram, wakes up at 4 in the morning to find his crazy cousin Morad by his bedroom window with a beautiful white horse. Morad and Aram's family have grown up in poverty all of their lives, have been raised to be honest and good, and never take advantage of people. For that reason, Aram is in near disbelief when he sees his cousin with a horse he isn't able to afford. But he also has loved horses his whole life, and has always had a longing to ride them. Aram asks Morad if he stole the horse, and Morad says to come out the window if he wants to ride or not. And as soon as Morad says this, he knows Morad stole it. Aram decides that unless they were doing something evil with the horse, like stealing, it was fine to take it for one ride. He then proceeds to jump out his window and ride the horse with Morad. While they ride, Morad begins to sing very loudly, and Aram begins to describe why Morad is so crazy. He says that their tribe believes that Morad was considered a descendant of the crazy streak in their tribe. He was descended from a big man named Khosrov, who had a short temper, who was very irritable. They kept riding until Morad told the boy to get off. Aram asked why, and he said because he had a way with the horse, so the horse would let him ride alone. Aram then says that he's just as good with the horse as Morad, but lets Morad ride alone first. Morad proceeded to ride the horse really well. Then it was Aram's turn. Aram couldn't get the horse to start running, and when he did, it sprinted towards the vineyard and threw the boy off. They then lost the horse, and it took Morad half an hour to find the horse. A long while later, Morad came back with the horse, and they decided to hide it in an old vineyard. While they were walking there, Aram realized Morad had been taking these early morning rides many times before. But Morad said if anyone asked, then he should say that this was his first time taking it, so that no one would, not one of them could, so that one of them could keep a good reputation. That afternoon, a lonely farmer named John Biro came into Aram's house and complained about having to walk 10 miles to get there. He also complained about losing money and not being able to farm because of the loss of his horse. While John Biro was complaining, Khosrov yelled back at him for complaining about his life by saying that everyone has lost a lot, so what's the problem with one horse? Aram goes to tell Morad about what happened and to demand that he takes it back to him after he teaches him how to ride a horse. Morad and Aram decide to take it back at 6 months at the latest. After 2 weeks of riding early every morning, Aram finally learns. When they are walking back to the vineyard, they come across John Biro. John Biro recognizes the horse and said if it weren't for their reputation, he would think that horse was his. Early the next morning, they returned the horse back to John Biro. John Biro came back to their house the following morning showing off his horse, saying that the horse has come back stronger than ever. And of course, after John Biro says this, Khosrov shouts at the lonely farmer to be quiet and let it go. So I know that was a very long version of the summary, so here's kind of a dumbed down, short summary. So basically, the gist of it is the poor boy's cousin, Aram, shows up with a nice horse. Aram decides to ride the horse, but horse throws him off. He runs off. Morad finds the horse, but he's too late. It was too late in the day to take it back. So a few hours later, the owner, they hide it in a vineyard. Then the owner, John Biro, he complains about wanting his horse back. He was tired, he had to walk all that much. And then the boy, Aram, goes over and tells Morad to take the horse back when the boy learns to ride Aram. And after a few weeks, 2 weeks, they're walking back from the vineyard where they hid the horse. And John Biro looks at the horse and he says, John Biro says that if it wasn't for their family's reputation, he would think that it was his horse. So, Morad then decides to take it back that next morning, and John Biro comes back over to their family's inn, and he's bragging about his horse, saying, "Oh, I got this horse back after a few weeks, and it's better, it's stronger than it was before." And of course, Khosrov, he has to shout, "Oh, just let it be." So, as I said, there are lots of examples of indirect characterization. Just another example of that is observed when Aram is wanting Morad to let him ride alone despite not having the proper training, or, as Morad says, way. So, Aram, being the gutsy person he is, he says, "Well," I said, "anyway you have with a horse, I have also." When Aram says this, it's shown that he doesn't really care that Morad is better with animals than he is. He just wants to ride. We see this idea of Aram wanting to do the same things as Morad many times throughout the story, actually. So, as I said before, the protagonist, Aram, is described through indirect characterization. And indirect characterization is when a characterization is shown based on what the character actually does. And we see lots of examples of indirect characterization throughout Summer of Beautiful White Horse, but just one of them is when Aram is kind of looking at the pros and cons of Morad bringing a horse to his house at that hour, and Aram wondered what he should do, thinks, "Consequently, even though I could see the horse so magnificent, even though I could smell it so lovely, even though I could hear it breathing so exciting, I couldn't believe the horse had anything to do with my cousin Morad, or with me, or with any of the other members of our family, asleep or awake, because I knew my cousin Morad couldn't have bought the horse, and if he couldn't have bought it, he must have stolen it, and I refused to believe he had stolen it." In this quote, we see that Aram is really a rational person who really thinks through decisions. Now, as we'll find out later in the story, he might not make the best decision at the first glance, but he does take time thinking through that decision. So right here is just a little diagram kind of outlining what I just said before about how protagonist indirect characterization, antagonist direct characterization. So throughout the Summer of the Beautiful White Horse, we see a lot of examples of characterization, and traditionally for most short stories, the protagonist will generally be characterized through indirect characterization, whereas the antagonist will be characterized through direct characterization. And we definitely see that trend in The Summer of the Beautiful White Horse. This particular instance actually gets Aram in a lot of trouble as he goes on the horse when he's not trained, and he ends up flying off the horse because he doesn't know how to ride it. So that's another instance of him thinking through the decision, but not necessarily making the right decision. So, as I said before, Aram, he tends to look for loopholes when making decisions. For example, try to come up with ways to justify his decision, and he usually does this internally. So we see an instance of this internal loopholing, I guess, when it finally dawns on Aram that Morad had been taking early morning rides similar to the one they just did, and he had been doing them many times before that morning. So Aram, astonished, thinks, "Suddenly dawned on me that he had been taking these early morning rides for some time, and had come for me this morning only because he knew how much I longed to ride." Now this is yet another example of a consequence that happens when you look for a loophole when making decisions. If Aram wouldn't have been looking for reasons to go riding with Morad, might not have thought to ask him if he had ever gone riding before, which definitely could have altered his decision-making process. Now, this last characterization example happens earlier in the story, but it ties back to what I'm going to talk about in a few minutes here. So, final showing of Aram showing indirect characterization is when he decides to go on the horse with Morad, despite knowing that the horse was not either of theirs. Aram, contemplating the unknown, thinks, "Well, it seemed to me stealing a horse for a ride was not the same thing as stealing something else, such as money. For all I knew, maybe it wasn't stealing at all. If you were crazy about horses the way my cousin Morad and I were, it wasn't stealing. It wouldn't become stealing until we offered to sell the horse, which of course I knew we would never do." So we see indirect characterization here Because by deciding that going on the horse is okay, Aram is showing that he's type to get around things, as we've talked about before now. But Aram does show that he has changed at the end of the story when he goes to Morad to tell him that John Biro needs his horse back. So I made this another diagram here demonstrating the difference between a flat and round character. So flat character is just kind of character without any development, and a round one is a character that undergoes development. So a flat character is usually a character trait that correlates with a static character, and a round is what correlates with a dynamic character. So just normally Aram would be considered a round character, and he is in this case. Now, because Aram is also a dynamic character, he also must be considered a round character. So here's just a little diagram I drew comparing and contrasting static and dynamic characters. So basically, static is when you're faced with conflict, they don't change, and a dynamic is when you are faced with conflict, you do change. So we definitely see this with Aram because he does change at the end of the story. He does want to give the horse back, and he starts kind of thinking more about other people, more about other people than what he did in the beginning. So overall, Aram is described through indirect characterization. He's a round and dynamic character. So we know that Aram is a dynamic character, and he must also be a round character because of that. So this description fits Aram perfectly, obviously. He encounters conflict by finding out John Biro is not doing well because they took the horse for a ride, and he's changed by it. And the example that would be by demanding to Morad that they took the horse back, that they take the horse back soon. Aram, demanding, says, "The farmer, John Biro," I said. He visited our house. He wants his horse. You've had it a month. I want you to promise not to take it back until I learn to ride." Because of this change in attitude towards stealing, Aram would be considered a dynamic character.